Hello, I'm Dr. Monty Hayes with another video mini lesson for Kirkwood's high school completion program in English. You'll recall that the elements of an argument include the thesis or claim, the main point that an author wants to convey, either to get readers or viewers to change their opinions or perhaps even to take action with regard to the issue. This thesis or claim is supported by reasons and evidence. And today I'd like us to take a look at an online document which makes an argument so that we can see how there is a thesis and reasons are offered in support of that thesis. This is so that you can in turn look at published arguments or perhaps sample student arguments and discern what reasons are offered, what evidence is offered, and whether in fact those reasons are solid, whether they're logical, whether they relate to the thesis, and whether the evidence is reliable and relevant to the claim. So what we see here, this is a web document about child marriage. This suggests that perhaps the thesis is to inform. Every year, 15 million girls are married as children, denied their rights to health, education, and opportunity, and robbed of their childhood. Okay, so we get what's known as a move to create exigency or a sense of urgency. We get numbers. Every year, 15 million girls are married as children. So this is, according to the authors at girlsnotbride.org. So it's an organization with an agenda, a goal of ending child marriage. And we see that this is an issue that affects many, many girls. And then denied their rights to health, education, and opportunity. Remember, we've looked at CAPS, context, audience, purpose, and strategies. I'm thinking that the audience here is largely American readers who have grown up on a credo of rights and valuing education. So when we read that someone is being denied her rights with a constitutional background, we think, well, that's wrong. We might want to put a stop to that. And robbed of their childhood. This is an emotional appeal. It plays to the idealization, romanticization of childhood, and that someone is robbed of her childhood. That's, again, intended to shock and perhaps outrageous. Then, if we do nothing, by 2030, an estimated 15.4 million girls a year will marry as children. And look, children, childhood, children. We see the language choice being used to advance the thesis that it is inappropriate for girls, for children, to enter into marriage. All right, we also see some conventions of genre. This is an online document. This is bold. This is a larger font. Then, reading along, each year 15 million girls are married before the age of 18. That is 28 girls every minute. Again, suggesting the scope of the problem, hopefully on the part of the authors, creating a sense of urgency among readers. Oh my goodness, that's a lot. Perhaps we should indeed do something. These girls are married off too soon, endangering their personal development and well-being. Endangering. With more young people on our planet than ever before, again, a nod to context, where there are more children, if we do nothing to intervene in the patterns, child marriage will grow. Child marriage is a human rights violation that we must end to achieve a fairer future for all. Okay, right there, we have the claim. Child brides are often disempowered, dependent on their husbands, and deprived of their fundamental rights. Again, we see this to health, education, and safety. Again, think about a reader who's grown up on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Think of, people who are readers who might indeed value education and want others to have access to that. Neither physically nor emotionally ready to become wives and mothers, child brides are at a greater risk of experiencing dangerous complications in pregnancy and childbirth, becoming infected with HIV/AIDS, and suffering domestic violence. Okay, so we have the implicit reason that childhood and marriage do not appropriately go together. And now we see child brides are at a greater risk of experiencing dangerous complications in pregnancy and childbirth, becoming infected with HIV/AIDS, and suffering domestic violence. We get there 3 reasons. With little access to education and economic opportunities, they and their families are more likely to live in poverty, an additional reason in support of the thesis. Nations also feel the impact. A system that undervalues the contribution of young women limits its own possibilities. In this way, child marriage drains countries of the innovation and potential that would enable them to thrive. So with this, we want to think again about audience as well as the structure of the argument, reasons. We get as readers an additional reason to want to intervene in the practice of child marriage. And this one is not only to protect children and preserve their rights. This is perhaps in readers' self-interests. Nations that do not have as much child marriage will be more prosperous because child marriage can result in poverty. So again, we get perhaps a broadening of audience with this additional reason. And one reason I chose this document is because as an electronic document, it follows some conventions of visual genres, and we get the use of boldface. So as I scan through the document, as I scroll through and scan the text, I'd like you to think about how these reasons might be developed into a prose essay if it were something that you were going to turn in a college or high school course. So now in boldface, a persistent problem. And we'll see the use of repetition here. More common in speeches and in online documents than traditional college papers. But again, we see on behalf of the authors at girlsnotbrides.org, we see in this first boldface subtitle, we see that the authors want to make sure that readers understand that this is something that is widespread. And we see the authors take a look at the sources, poverty, culture, child marriage facts. Okay, so the purpose here, is not primarily, the purpose here is not primarily to inform, but the authors introduce some statistics, perhaps we can call it evidence, in support of their thesis. This is a widespread problem, and those of us who are concerned about it must intervene. More than 30% of today's women were married before their 18th birthday. If there is no reduction in child marriage, an additional 1.2 billion girls will be married by 2050. Some child brides are as young as 8 or 9. Most adolescent pregnancies, 90%, take place within marriage. Pregnancy and childbirth complications are among the leading causes of death in girls aged 15 to 19 in low and middle income countries. So we get some facts that are introduced to inform readers, but perhaps also to convince us to share the viewpoint that, again, this is a serious issue that requires intervention. Now, something we don't see in this online genre is attribution to source, and that would be required in a high school or college paper. It's good when we read documents like this to look for links or to read additional documents to see whether the statistics recur across documents, to see whether this seems to be a mainstream presentation of facts or something that is perhaps manipulating the numbers or omitting certain numbers. But we get in a fairly measured tone, which I think lends to the ethos of the piece, some numbers that perhaps will alarm many readers who live in communities where child marriage is not prevalent. Again, repetition, compelling reasons to act now, and then elaboration on that. with the slightly smaller font. It violates human rights and is illegal. So an appeal to morality and legality. It perpetuates poverty. The longer we wait, the bigger the problem will be. Again, we get some evidence in support of that reason, though I would be curious to know the source of that evidence. Progress is possible. It's a complex issue. That does not mean there is a single simple solution, but as the authors write, through partnership, long-term programming, and a willingness to learn from our successes and failures, we can end child marriage in a generation. Global pressure, collective action, and what does international law say, with a link. Now we see that these reasons are listed in large, bold font. We see that there's some explanation of these reasons, but we see that there's not, aside from the introduction of some statistics, a tremendous amount of detail. Again, we might follow some of the hyperlinks, but this is in some ways an introduction. So when we think again of audience, these might be readers who are inclined to care about human rights, who are not incredibly familiar with the issue of child marriage, and who might want to do further reading, as I certainly would encourage you to do if this were a research problem about which you were writing in class. So you can see through this electronic document with its white space and its large, bold font for the reasons in support of a claim, the structure of an argument, an example for you to analyze as you go forward analyzing arguments as you complete this online course.